Slate, April 9th, 1975, program number 3, title, Another Look at Appalachia. It's Women. High band color, 15 inches per second.
Let's take another look at Appalachia with our very special guest, Gloria Steimen, an editor of Ms. Magazine. And with me to interview her today is Mary Lee Daugherty, an activist leader in Appalachia on behalf of the Appalachian woman. We might start with some questions with Mary Lee.
Gloria, as I travel around Appalachia and as I've lived and grown up here, I think and I understand and I hear women saying there are about 4 ideas they have about the women's movement. Maybe we might talk about these ideas and explore whether or not they're real or imaginary. One is that the women's movement is only for the middle-class white woman. The other is that all of us will end up being divorced if we get involved in the women's movement. Everyone's saying we'll be burning our bras or that we'll all become lesbians. These are the 4 comments I most commonly hear here in my mountain state. I wonder if you can respond to that.
It's a wonderful tribute to the American press, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, it's not just in Appalachia that that's true. I mean, the reason that women go out on the road speaking and traveling and that we, publish alternate magazines or, try to get in touch with each other is precisely to explain that feminism is not that at all, that feminism is simply saying women are full human beings. It's about simple justice. In fact, it's so simple that you can't understand why it's not happening, except that the power of the country and the power of many countries is organized along caste lines, that is, according to sex or race or class for that matter. And we're really just talking about simple justice. Now, I don't know where to begin with.
Making human society human.
Yes, and so each human being is unique, that we do not have to conform to an idea of what women do or men do or blacks do or whites do or Appalachian people do or New York people do, that we are unique individuals and we have a right to express ourselves and our talents. As far as the mythology is concerned, it's so crazy that I hardly know where to begin. I mean, nobody ever burned a bra, for instance. I think maybe just the alliteration, bra burning, got to the people in the press. Right. There was a man in California, a bra manufacturer, who once burned a bra in order to get publicity for his product. But
it's a myth. It's a misconception.
It's a myth. There was a demonstration against a Miss America contest in '68 at which women threatened to burn lots of things. I mean, a steno pad and an apron and a dust mop and a bra and a whole bunch of stuff. And they didn't do it because they couldn't get a fire permit. You see, we're just much too meek. As for divorce, I mean, the fact that, 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4, depending on how you look at it, marriages was ending in divorce long before there was a women's movement. What women are simply saying is that there should be lots of ways that you can live, with people, without people, in couples, with children, that any one way of living is not going to be right for everybody. And so now we're looking for choice. As for, what were the other 2? One was the...
That it's only a middle-class white woman's movement.
Right.
And I think that question perhaps leads into my next feeling and the response of many women here, and that is that the women's movement that we've read about and seen on television primarily seems to be happening in the large urban centers like New York, Chicago, Boston. Mm-hmm. And we're asking, what would feminism look like in a rural Appalachian setting? We've just been talking with women here, in the rural setting. What will it look like? What will it be like?
It's very interesting. I think that what I have learned from traveling around the country a couple of times a week for 5 or 6 years is to precisely that image isn't true. It isn't just happening in the cities. That's where the press is. In fact, women, all the issues of the women's movement are more likely to affect your life as you go down the economic ladder or as you get into communities where there are fewer alternatives, so that you find more force and more organizing in smaller cities or outside of the big cities where maybe you can find a child care center or a part-time job or some kind of relief than you do in the cities. You also find that older women are more active than younger women, which goes against the stereotype, perhaps because they've lived long enough to see the discrimination and see what the problems are. As for the white middle class, I mean, I think it's part of putting the women's movement down as trivial. Because the truth is that most of the great movements in the country, the black movement and others, have been begun by people who had a little bit of breathing space, who had a little bit of
Who were just halfway
time to
up.
dream, to see how unjust it was. If you're very poor, you don't have time to go to a meeting unless you're pretty sure it's going to bring practical help right away. So that's been a little bit true of every movement in this country, and many of them outside as well. But it's used to condemn the women's movement, I think, because the women's movement is seen as more trivial than any other because women are seen as trivial.
And each woman is, as I think we've said, just one man away from poverty in
Yes,
many cases.
Absolutely. I mean, literally one man away from welfare in many cases, because if she did not have a male salary, since women only earn about 50-60% of what men do for full-time work, she could not, as an adult person, she couldn't maybe even support herself, much less children and so on. And we're all vulnerable to this system. And I think in a rural setting, some of the problems are different, some of the tactics are different, but the basic problems remain the same and sometimes increase. For instance, women in a suburban setting, middle-class women, often complain of isolation. They feel very locked up in their houses and, away from other people. They don't have lives of their own and so on. That problem simply increases as you get to Appalachia and you get less good transportation, and women who can't even get to a doctor's appointment or can't get out to the supermarket to buy food.
Right.
There's
no
but
bus
it's
service.
It's the same kind of problem of women being isolated in these little units. The same thing is true, say, of the whole issue of health and reproductive freedom, as women keep saying, listen, we want to talk about reproductive freedom, not birth control, because that's an authoritarian phrase. We want to, obviously each individual person should have that freedom to decide to have children or not to have children. And that becomes even more of a problem as you have less access to medical facilities and you get into more isolated areas.
And so many of our counties do not have doctors or do not have nurses or do not have medical services for any of our people, and certainly some of them do not have them for our women.
Mm-hmm. Yes, even those areas where there are clinics often don't meet women's needs. And women, we all share the fact that we are a good deal more likely to need physicians and medical care in our lifetime because we bear children, and that's a fact that we all share wherever we are. We're about 3 times more likely to go to a doctor at some time in our lives than men are, and so we suffer even more wherever we are from this lack of care.
Mary Lee has done some research on the number of women who in fact do not have hospital care during pregnancy or during birth. Do you have those figures handy?
Well, I don't have the statistics, but it certainly is true that we have a very high infant mortality rate in our counties, in our rural areas, one of the highest in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And, many women experience terrible infections as a result of home deliveries and inadequate medical facilities.
And if there are opportunities for hospital care, many will reject it because the suffering is a part of the syndrome in this area. The necessity to suffer to produce something that's good, a child is something that's good.
Well, I'd rather ask the woman that. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I remember, because it strikes a bell in my head, it's like, well, if they had bathtubs, they wouldn't know how to use them. You know what I mean?
That's not true.
Yeah, I think we all have, each individual woman has full common sense and wisdom, and if she's given the option of a safer and easier birth and better care, I think she would
One
take
of
it.
my concerns is also that so often in our nation, the Appalachian woman is only portrayed as a hillbilly woman. And this is simply not representative of the women in my area. We are many types of women. I'm an Appalachian woman. My grandmother was a hill woman. My mother and my father lived in the factories after the mines were closed. So we have in Appalachia all areas of women and all faces of women.
Yeah,
and so the women's movement will mean many different things to women here in this area of the United States.
As it does to women all over the country,
Certainly.
but we're trying to get over these false divisions.
Right.
You know, I mean, for instance, the fact that a woman is married to a middle-class man is supposed to mean that she's a middle-class person, or if she's married to a powerful man, she might even be an upper-class person, except that she doesn't have any power many times, and she can indeed be traded in for a younger person, and frequently is, and doesn't, yet she acquires all the resentment and all the treatment and, you know, well, resentment really afforded to the middle class just because she's attached to a middle-class man. The whole class structure needs to be re-examined as it does or does not affect women, and as it serves to artificially divide us from each other. I grew up in Ohio, and all the parents of everybody I knew worked in the factories in Toledo. And yet, because I live in New York now, I've acquired another stereotype. I think I really relate to Appalachian women on the level of stereotype because I know how difficult it is to overcome and to say that, you know, we're each human beings with dignity and intelligence, and whether or not we've had a formal education, whether or not we're attached to a particular kind of family or man or job, we have a unique potential.
But don't you think that formal education does give you more opportunities to be liberated, or to at least to deal with the myths?
Well, no, not necessarily. I think an interesting thing that women are discovering now is that it's sometimes better to break into blue-collar occupations that have not been open to women than to do the white-collar work for which you need a BA degree. I mean, what's happened in recent years is that the unemployed among women have been getting better and better educated. And, you know, we've been discovering that a secretary, a clerical worker, a salesperson, and so on, may make very much less money than somebody who works in a factory on an assembly line, who drives a bus, somebody who works in the mines. Now, I mean, I think women all over the country just related enormously with support and enthusiasm when they read that women were also working in the mines, because we know in our hearts that the physical labor we do in our traditional, less well-paid jobs is just as hard.
Oh, certainly it is. But notice, for example, we were talking before this program about a particular miner who was going to join us for some of these activities during the week, and who decided she shouldn't because her life was in danger. She should go unnamed for that reason.
Her foreman physically threatened her. Yes. How seriously, we don't know. But if she came to this meeting, now I think that says something about what happens when you really, in any way, challenge power. Now, all she would have been doing is coming to meet other women.
Yes.
And all black people or poor people of any kind, you know, were doing was going to meet their group and organize and try to make things better. But even that is such a threat to the power structure that you begin to see the response.
Well, there is some comfort in the power structure. And like Mary Lee, I grew up here in the mountains. Have been here all my life, except for some brief time outside for education. And I know a lot of women in my family who would be threatened by a lot of words used here today. Just the words would carry connotations. The words would evoke myths.
Well, if you're there hanging on by your fingers, you know.
But so many are.
And so, of course we are. I mean, I spent years saying I don't identify with women's groups, yes. Taking pride in that fact. People would say to me, "You write like a man," and I would say, "Thank you." I mean, because I had a little bit of privilege, because I was the only woman or one of few women in a group of men professionally and so on. And I didn't want to give that up. It took me years to see that wherever I was a woman. Do you know all the terrible jokes in the South about what's a black nuclear physicist in the South, a nigger? Well, what's a competent, independent woman any place is a bitch or a difficult person or what? Wherever you are, you end up being a co or a vice or an assistant or serving coffee or doing the typing or being subject to all those myths and so on. And the only way we're ever going to defeat it is to to unite with each other and work on those problems
This
together.
is one of the humanizing effects I see of the women's movement, is that it is breaking down the class barriers of women. Today we've been with wealthy women and poor women and educated women and uneducated and black women and white women. And what we all have in common is that we are women. And we know what it is to live in that kind of body and to have that kind of experience.
And there is
And that's what
a women's
is
culture that does have different values, measurably different values in general. I'm not saying every woman does, but
And
in general from the men's culture.
And the experience of women helping women is a very new phenomenon. I have never experienced that myself until just last year.
Value systems, though, can become stumbling blocks. And in Appalachia, we have a fairly stable value system, stable in the sense that it's a problem sometimes to work outside of it. Mary Lee knows this in terms of her activities to assist women to help themselves. And there's some comfort in the stereotyping. There's some comfort in at least identifying and giving labels to why you're clinging by the ends of your fingers. And I've seen this all my life here. I've seen it here more, I think, than I've seen anywhere else. I lived in New York State nearly a year, in Cleveland 4, in Europe 3 years. And I haven't seen this desperation to such intensity as I've seen it in the mountains, and through acculturation in the cities here in the mountains.
Right.
Well, sure, but you need to see. I mean, it's in our heads that let's say if women work at night. I mean, in New York, for instance, women were not supposed to be waitresses or bartenders, which were incidentally very well-paid jobs, because they would have to go home late at night. And you sit and you say to yourself, "That's right." And then you say, oh, but wait a minute, it happens that every office building in the entire city of New York and all the boroughs is for the most part cleaned at night by women who go home late on the subways. Now, the magical difference between those two jobs is pay. I mean, the woman who's working in the office buildings is just not getting paid as much. So we have to start examining, taking the myth and applying it to other situations. You know, women are good at detail work, right? Terrific. Then how come it's only sewing or factory work, you know, poorly paid work, but if it's brain surgery, we're not so good anymore?
That's another kind of
right. I mean, you know, we just have to see the illogic of the myth as we apply it to different situations, and it opens up whole new vistas of possibilities to us.
But the reference tonight here, if you were to stand outside of a factory in the Appalachian area, and members of my family have at times. One sister worked her way through college by working in a factory. And if you stand outside of a factory at night, you don't see many women coming out. They're men.
Right.
And if women do come out, they have the tag of lesbian or some other such reference to them. Because women are not out after dark, certainly not in Appalachia, and I'm talking about 1975.
Well,
I think it's a bigger problem here than it is in New York.
I'm not suggesting that it's the same. It's not the same, but the basic issues are the same. I mean, believe me, going out at night in New York
It's dangerous.
is you know, thought to be as dangerous. But the problem is that, you know, women are now beginning to say, if that's true, it's not our fault. We have to create we are not the attackers.
Yes.
It's not the fault of the victim.
Who is?
It's the fault of the society that creates this kind of image of woman as victim, woman as sex object only, woman as the possession of men, to literally the possession of men, so that any man who happens to be around can claim to be her owner. That, you know, rape hasn't been seen as a serious crime until recently, and I know that struggle is just being fought in this state. That we're just beginning to reject all those definitions, that somehow it's our fault that we shouldn't be working at night, that we have to give up those jobs and so on, and to try to reshape society and our towns and those factories in a more human way.
Gloria, this is 1975, the Year of the Woman, declared so by the United Nations. And, you know, what do you perceive to be the future of the women's movement? You know, thinking about Appalachia, we've worked 3 years very hard to effect changes in our legislature. And we've been defeated on almost everything that we've asked for, with the exception of the passage of the ERA amendment. You know, we do not have a financed woman as head of the Governor's Commission on Women. The other bills that we have struggled so hard for, you know, we have been defeated. I know other women in other states are succeeding at a faster rate than we are, but what do you see as the impact of this year across the world and particularly here?
Well, I think it's mainly a consciousness-raising device that we can use. The United Nations declared it the Year of the Woman, which is a little crazy when you stop to think of, I mean, they're not declaring the Year of the Man. So what are they going to tell us next year? Your year's over. I mean, it's not, and there are almost no resources put into it. It's really just symbolic. However, women are inspired by that to reach out across national boundaries and to see that our problems are really the same in many, many ways. The very same problems that we describe here in Appalachia that exist for women in other parts of this country exist for women in France and Italy and the Middle East and India. I mean, the exact same kind of problems. And we are beginning to reach out to each other on these very basic survival issues and to say, wait a minute, a patriarchy is not an equitable, humanist, democratic form. It's not. To say, per se, that men are worth more than women in the marketplace, or that they own the children, or that they,
or their bodies are less valuable,
or whatever it may be. That to the degree that we are living in patriarchal countries, we share a lot of the same problems, and we are reaching out on those survival issues. I really think that we are at a place where the struggle is for survival and will continue to be, and therefore around basic health and food and money and personal freedom, jobs kind of issues for some time. We're just beginning to think theoretically a little bit too, and to look forward to the kinds of societies that we might have and that could meet this kind of humanist demand that we're making.
We have a wonderful song here in West Virginia, and it's Almost Heaven, West Virginia. And I've been thinking about that and thinking, part of the way in which it could be heaven, not just almost, would be that we could really enter into a free society, a truly human society, and where men and women, regardless of caste or money or whatever, could be themselves, could give all that they are capable of giving, could participate freely with the totality of their lives.
It's certainly inefficient and crazy to make decisions, based on an arbitrary, on sex or race or class or whatever it is. And I think that the women of Appalachia, like the women in many agricultural areas of the world, or non-urban, let's put it that way, areas of the world,
rural,
are a little bit ahead in some ways. That is, they've lived in situations where everybody tends to work together, although the mines changed that, but it's in an agricultural area, everybody, mothers and aunts and uncles, works in a common way frequently. And with industrialization, then men are taken out of the home and the sex roles get much more polarized. In urban areas, they are much more polarized.
Technology can alter that, but in Appalachia,
the family's still very basic.
it's very basic, and it's controlled, according to many anthropologists, as a matriarchy. The family unit is controlled by the mother figure.
Well, I mean, I would like to argue with those you can't have a matriarch with no power is no matriarch.
Well, but the question of power, though, is another question. You mean economic power?
No, women have some power in the home.
Decision power?
But as long as it's confined to the home, then it's not, it's extremely limited, and it's extremely frustrating. I think if you took any man with the strength and the hope and the ambition that he has and said to him, okay, what would it be like to be born female and to have all of your power and dreams confined to the home, then you would understand, what the problems are.
Well, considering the number of people in this area who are on welfare, and considering the number of men who are forced to leave the home in order to be welfare recipients, or in order to get money, this is an emasculating kind of thing.
And the environment is also
Isn't it
hostile.
interesting? We don't even have a word for women who are dehumanized or whatever. You see, we have the idea of masculinity, which means dignity and strength and so on. Women aren't even supposed to aspire to that, so there's no word for it. What do you say But women who are in the same...
Right.
Well, I can't
you know,
respond to that because I didn't have that in mind when I used the word in any sense of the reference. I was talking simply about being dehumanized and the loss of dignity rather than
Yeah.
strength, simply the loss of dignity.
Well, then we should
But
say
the
that
words
men and
tell us
women are
something.
dehumanized, yes,
Yes.
because to say that somebody is demasculinized already means that women are excluded from this process or are thought to be by nature.
But the power of a
Powerless.
good number of Appalachian homes is in the hands of women by
Well,
necessity.
I
They're the
think-
power, they're the strength, they're the central cementing force in the family.
Well,
They're
that's a
what holds
kind
it.
of sentimentalized view, I think, because...
No, this is the history of my growing up in these mountains and the
No, well,
research I've done.
I hear what you're saying, but it's
Yes.
said all over the country. You know, it's that
Is it?
black women are matriarchs, that Jewish women are the power in the home, that Irish women keep the family together, that Italian women are really, you know, and it has to do with the kind of sugar coating that's put on them, basically. I mean, if the role is so wonderful and powerful, why aren't men doing it?
And why aren't we
you know what I
rewarded
mean?
financially for it? Why
Yeah.
are we not rewarded financially? Or
I mean,
why
we should-
doesn't it make changes in the legislature?
You find why is it then considered bad for men to raise children, which is a wonderful experience that men are
Well, it isn't
deprived of?
here.
Or why is it? But I mean, it is in general. Or for men to stay home. You see, I mean, I think the minute that somebody says to a woman, "This is a wonderful thing that you're doing," you should say to yourself, "Would a man do it?" You know, and to try to judge whether it's just sugarcoating a role to get you to play it, or whether it is, you know,
Well,
really something.
It could very well be part of the myth. It's something we've all come to expect is important in terms of corporate living, that society is important, therefore the family is a miniature reduction of society, or society is an expansion of the family. And
Well, the family
keeping
is.
it together is important.
But what do we mean by the family? I mean, because what we're supposed to think of, which of course was not necessarily the Appalachian family anyway, as the normal American family, which is, you know, mother, father,
Nuclear
2.2
family.
children, and so on, is a statistical rarity in this country right now. I mean, people who love each other and care about each other, and that's a family. A family with a woman parent, a single woman parent, or a single male parent is a family. There's love
Yes.
and caring there. We can't say that's not a family. That's not, you know, that's an abnormal situation. And so, you know, we have to recognize people's choices. There are a lot of honorable and loving ways to live, not just one.
Gloria,
and there
I have
are
a
many honorable questions we could go on asking, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Mary Lee, you carried this program beautifully. Thank you for joining us for another look at Appalachia.